Chattuji. The midday sun sat heavy over the Masai Mara, casting sharp shadows across the dry earth. The vast plains stretched out beneath the pale sky, the heat rising in shimmering waves from the cracked soil. In this sprawling wilderness, every movement, every sound held meaning. But today, what caught Ranger Joseph's attention was something almost imperceptible. A faint rustle beneath the parked jeep near the edge of a shallow copse of acacia trees. His eyes focused on that subtle disturbance, barely more than a whisper against the silence of the afternoon. He crouched slowly, careful not to spook whatever had made it. There, pressed against the metal frame of the vehicle, lay a small shape trembling softly. It was a lion cub, barely bigger than a domestic cat, curled tightly into itself beneath the shade. Its tawny coat was patchy and streaked with dirt, fur matted where the grime clung to it. The little creature's body shook, not from the heat, but from exhaustion and fear. Its large, wide eyes, glassy with confusion, reflected the sunlight in tiny golden pools. The cub's breathing was shallow and uneven, the rise and fall of its tiny chest fragile beneath thin ribs. Joseph could see faint scars and scrapes across its legs and flanks, marks that told of a recent struggle. The small paw closest to him was swollen and bruised, a dark purple spreading under the skin that suggested a painful injury. Joseph's voice, low and calm, broke the stillness. "It's alone," he said to the team gathered nearby. His words hung in the air, heavy with urgency and worry. The cub had been separated from its pride, a dangerous fate for any young lion, especially one so vulnerable and injured. The pride, usually a close-knit group of adults and cubs moving as one, was nowhere to be seen. The silence where they should have been was ominous. For a cub to survive on its own here was to walk a razor's edge between life and death. The surrounding landscape was a blend of golden grasses and sparse trees, the kind that offered little refuge from the harsh midday sun. A gentle breeze stirred dry leaves and dust, carrying the faint, bittersweet scent of earth and distant water. Somewhere far off, a bird called, a single, clear note that echoed briefly before fading into the vastness. Despite the outward stillness, danger lurked in this quiet. Hyenas prowled nearby, vultures circled overhead, and other predators moved with silent intent across the Mara. The cub's position beneath the jeep was a small island of shade and protection in an otherwise exposed environment. Joseph knelt beside the cub, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. He noted the thinness of the cub's limbs and the fragile way it clung to life despite its wounds and isolation. The injury to the front paw would make walking difficult and painful, but it was not broken. Still, any movement risked aggravating the swelling and bruising, and without food or water, the cub's strength would quickly fade. Hunger was already visible in its large, pleading eyes. The team's veterinarian, Dr. Amina, stepped forward quietly, crouching beside Joseph to examine the paw with steady, gentle hands. Her face was calm but serious as she assessed the injury. The swelling was severe, and the soft tissue was damaged, but there were no broken bones. This meant the paw could heal with rest and care, but only if the cub survived the critical hours ahead. The team faced a difficult decision: to intervene immediately and risk scaring the cub into fleeing with an injured limb, or to wait and hope the cub could hold on until it was safe to move. Joseph knew that either choice carried risk. If the cub tried to run, the injury might worsen, or it could stumble and be caught by predators. If it stayed still and hidden, it might grow weaker, starving and vulnerable to the heat and thirst of the savannah. The stakes were painfully clear. If the cub moved, it might die. If it stayed, it might also die. The balance was fragile and cruel. Joseph spoke softly, his voice barely more than a murmur. "We'll help you." The cub's eyes flicked up, wide and uncertain, and it let out a quiet whimper, a fragile sound that seemed to speak of confusion and loneliness. It pressed its small body closer to the ground, seeking shelter under the jeep's cold metal, as if the weight of the world was too much to bear. There was no fight in the cub, only survival instinct, an urge to hide from danger and to wait, somehow, for rescue. The nearby grasses bore traces of its passage, flattened stalks, faint paw prints pressed into the dusty earth, and signs of a struggle in the form of disturbed soil and broken twigs. These small details told a story of a cub forced into solitude, separated from the safety of family. The absence of the pride was glaring. Lions are social creatures, their strength lying in their groups. A lone cub was a fragile anomaly, a life exposed to the relentless threats of the wild. Joseph's team set up a cautious perimeter, careful not to encroach too quickly on the cub's space. The goal was to keep the animal calm, to prevent it from bolting and injuring itself further. The heat pressed down on them all, and sweat beaded on Joseph's forehead, but his hands were steady as he prepared supplies nearby. Food and water would have to be introduced slowly and gently. The cub's trust could not be rushed. As Joseph sat back on his heels, he noted the cub's subtle reactions, the flick of ears at distant sounds and the slight turn of its head toward the veterinarian's soft movements. The animal was watching, learning, and trying to understand. Trust was a thread they would have to weave carefully. This small life, tucked beneath a vehicle in the vastness of the Mara, was suddenly the center of their attention and care. The dry afternoon stretched on, and the cub remained motionless beneath the jeep's shadow, its small form barely stirring except for the occasional shudder. Joseph could see the faint twitch of whiskers and the gentle flutter of eyelids as the cub tried to rest. The injury was a constant danger. Any movement could be catastrophic, yet stillness threatened starvation. The team's quiet determination filled the space with a careful balance of hope and realism. They could not control the wild, only protect this fragile thread of life long enough to give it a chance. The sun shifted. Shadows lengthened and the cub's breathing slowed as exhaustion took hold. The team prepared to move the cub carefully at dusk when the heat would ease and the shadows would offer safer cover. For now, the fragile presence beneath the jeep was alive, vulnerable, uncertain, but still here. Its survival depended on every careful choice made in the next few hours. The stakes were simple. If they failed, this tiny cub would not see another dawn. If they succeeded, there was still a chance for life, for healing, and perhaps one day for a return to the wild pride that once protected it. Joseph looked once more at the small creature beneath the vehicle and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." It was a promise made softly in the vast, unforgiving plains where survival was never guaranteed. The quiet rustle of the cub beneath the jeep was a small sound in a vast world, but for those watching, it was the fragile beginning of a fight to save a life. The afternoon had softened into a gentle, warm stillness as the team settled quietly near the small lion cub, which remained crouched beneath the protective shadow of the parked jeep. The animal's body was pressed low to the dusty earth, its tawny fur dulled and matted with dust and dried mud. It shivered occasionally, subtle tremors running through its small frame. Its large, expressive eyes flickered with wary awareness, scanning the slow approach of Ranger Joseph and Dr. Amina, the team's veterinarian. Despite the obvious fear, the cub did not bolt. Instead, it remained still, pressed closer to the ground, muscles taut but not tense enough to spring. The delicate balance between caution and exhaustion was evident in every movement. The cub's breathing was shallow and uneven. Its small chest rose and fell with the quiet struggle of survival. Joseph sat carefully a few meters away, keeping his movements slow and measured. His voice was low and calm as he spoke quietly. Not to command, but to offer reassurance. "We're here. You're safe." The words were gentle, and though the cub did not understand them as language, they carried the quiet presence of care. This was not an animal accustomed to human contact, and it would take time to bridge the gap between fear and trust. The team had to act with patience and respect, aware that any sudden motion could send the cub running, risking further injury or separation. The cub's paw injury was a clear and pressing concern. Dr. Amina had examined the swollen limb carefully, noting deep bruising and soft tissue damage. No bones were broken, but the pain and swelling limited the cub's movement significantly. Each step could cause further harm, making fleeing or even moving difficult. At the same time, the cub needed nourishment, hydration, and rest to survive. The team understood the dilemma. Immediate intervention might stress the cub and provoke panic, but waiting too long risked starvation, dehydration, and exposure to predators. The stakes were clear. Failure to act with care could mean death. Around them, the savanna stretched endlessly, the golden grasses swaying lightly in the breeze. The heat of midday had lessened, but the air was still warm, carrying the earthy scent of dry soil and the faint aroma of distant water holes. Birds called intermittently, their notes weaving through the stillness. The landscape was both beautiful and unforgiving, a reminder that life here was balanced on fine edges. The cub's vulnerability was amplified by its isolation. Lions rely on their prides for protection and nourishment. Alone, especially injured, the odds are steeply against survival. Joseph and the team laid out a plan to build trust gradually, offering care in a way that would not overwhelm the cub. Dr. Amina placed a shallow dish of milk near the cub's shelter, retreating carefully to allow it space. The cub hesitated, its nose twitching as it caught the unfamiliar scent. Its large eyes tracked the dish and the humans nearby, a mixture of curiosity and fear flickering in its gaze. After a long pause, the cub inched forward, tongue flicking hesitantly at the milk's surface. Each small sip was a quiet triumph, a sign that trust was beginning to form. The cub's body relaxed fractionally, muscles loosening from their previous tautness. Joseph remained still, his voice a soft murmur. "It's okay, girl." The phrase was simple, devoid of command, carrying only calm. The cub's ears flicked at his voice, eyes narrowing slightly but not withdrawing. The team recognized this subtle shift as a crucial turning point, a moment where the wild instincts of fear were meeting the human offer of care. The cub was still wary, but it was no longer paralyzed by panic. The plan was to wait until dusk before attempting to move the cub. The cooler temperatures and lower visibility of evening would reduce stress and limit exposure to predators. Moving the cub carefully would require precise timing and a steady hand. The team began preparing a safe site nearby, a shaded area with blankets and food, to transport the cub for medical attention and further care. Every detail mattered. The cub's fragile condition left no margin for error. Throughout the afternoon, the cub's behavior fluctuated between cautious exploration and retreat into stillness. It flicked its ears at distant sounds, the low calls of birds, the rustle of small mammals in the grasses, and even the occasional faint roar of distant lions. Its nose twitched continually, picking up scents carried on the warm breeze. These small responses were signs that the cub was alert and aware, weighing its surroundings even as it grappled with pain and exhaustion. Joseph's observations extended beyond the immediate moment. He understood that the cub's recovery would depend not only on healing the paw, but also on restoring a sense of safety and trust. The team's presence had to be steady and predictable, never forceful. The wildness of the cub demanded respect, a recognition that this was a life shaped by instincts and survival rather than human emotion. The injury remained the clearest risk. If the cub tried to move too soon, the swollen paw could worsen, potentially crippling it. The longer it stayed in one place, the greater the danger from hunger and dehydration. The team's quiet vigilance was a necessary counterbalance, offering care while honoring the cub's instincts. Joseph stayed close, often sitting quietly just out of reach, allowing the cub to acclimate to his presence without feeling trapped. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the cub's movements grew slightly stronger. It shifted its weight cautiously, testing the injured paw with care. This small action was significant. It showed the cub's will to survive, even in pain. Joseph noted the subtle changes, encouraging the team to proceed with the plan to move the cub once the light softened. Timing was critical. Too soon, and the cub might panic. Too late, and exhaustion could claim it. The surrounding landscape began to cool as shadows lengthened. The vastness of the Mara pressed around them. A reminder that life here was a delicate balance of strength and vulnerability. The cub's survival depended on every choice the team made, their patience, their respect, and their careful interventions. The quiet decisions made now would ripple through the days ahead. Joseph's whispered words returned. "You're almost there." It was neither comfort nor command, but a soft acknowledgement of the difficult journey ahead. The cub lifted its head briefly, nostrils flaring as it breathed in the cooler evening air. Its gaze met Joseph's, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them, a fragile moment of trust in a world that demanded constant vigilance. The team prepared quietly, moving blankets and supplies with care, readying themselves for the next phase of rescue. The cub's fate was no longer a question of chance alone. It was now a story shaped by human hands, guided by respect and patience, and by an animal's quiet will to survive despite the odds. The risk remained profound, but so did the hope. Night would bring relief from the sun, but also new dangers. The team knew that this cub's survival depended on steady care, careful timing, and the trust slowly built in the fading light. The choices made this day were small steps toward a life still fragile but no longer alone. The cub lay quietly beneath the gentle shade of the acacia trees, nestled in the makeshift camp the team had prepared with care. Its small body, still trembling with weakness, pressed lightly against the soft earth, a fragile weight softened by the patchwork of blankets and leaves spread beneath it. The injury to the swollen paw was carefully bandaged, and a steady rhythm of quiet breathing filled the stillness around. Ranger Joseph and Dr. Amina had moved slowly and deliberately, carrying the cub in a way that avoided sudden movements, minimizing stress. Now, in this temporary refuge, the cub could rest safely away from the harsh glare of the sun and the ever-present dangers of the open savanna. The stakes remained clear. Without rest and nourishment, survival was impossible. But even small progress was cause for guarded hope. Joseph watched quietly as the cub's large eyes shifted, flickering with the first signs of alertness beyond fear. Its ears twitched at the gentle rustling of leaves, and it turned its head slowly toward the team, a tentative curiosity replacing the earlier wide-eyed wariness. The cub's breathing was more even now, less ragged and shallow, evidence of the gradual easing of pain and exhaustion. Its small tongue licked at the edge of a shallow dish where warm milk had been placed. The hesitant sips a delicate balance of need and uncertainty. Each swallow was a step toward recovery, a fragile assertion of life against the odds. The environment around the camp was calm and sheltered, the canopy filtering the harsh light and casting dappled shadows that moved softly with the breeze. This quiet shelter offered more than physical protection. It was a space for the cub to begin trusting again. The injury remained a pressing concern. Dr. Amina checked the paw frequently, careful to keep handling minimal but thorough. The swelling was slowly subsiding, but the tissue was still tender, requiring rest and gentle care. Any sudden movement risked reopening the injury or causing pain severe enough to panic the cub. Joseph understood that every interaction must be measured and respectful. The cub was not a pet, but a wild animal whose survival depended on preserving natural instincts alongside human aid. The team's approach was gentle, never rushed, acknowledging the delicate line between help and harm. The surrounding savanna held its steady rhythms, the whisper of the wind through the grass, the distant calls of birds settling for the night. The camp was small and quiet, a pocket of stillness carved out from the vastness. Occasionally, the cub shifted position, testing the ground beneath its paws, lifting the injured limb with caution. The movements were slow and deliberate, signaling a growing awareness of its own strength and limits. Joseph noted these subtle signs. Every flick of the ear and every twitch of the nose was a message of the cub's state. The cautious exploration of its surroundings was the first step toward healing not just physically but emotionally. Fear was still present, but beneath it, curiosity began to surface. Feeding continued carefully throughout the afternoon. Small amounts of warm milk and soft meat were offered, and the cub accepted these nutrients in tentative, irregular bursts. Each feeding was a quiet negotiation, offering nourishment without overwhelming the cub's senses or triggering flight instincts. The team observed closely, adapting their approach based on the animal's responses. The risk was that too much too soon could cause distress or rejection. Too little, and weakness would deepen. The balance was critical and maintained through patience and quiet attentiveness. Joseph spoke softly now and then, his tone low and steady. "You're safe here." His words were more reassurance to the team and the cub alike, a calm thread woven through the quiet hours. The cub's gaze occasionally met his, eyes reflecting a faint light of recognition but never submission. This was trust built on respect and time, not coercion or command. The gentle bond forming between the cub and its human caretakers was fragile but real. As evening approached, the air cooled and the savanna's sounds shifted. Crickets began their chorus, and the calls of distant animals rose and fell in patterns as ancient as the land itself. The cub's body relaxed further, its head resting more often on the soft ground, eyes closing briefly between sips of nourishment. The injury was still a shadow hanging over its recovery, but for now, it was quiet and manageable. The team knew this calm was temporary but vital, a chance for the cub to gather strength for what lay ahead. The camp remained a sanctuary where vulnerability met protection. The open plains waited beyond, unpredictable and vast. But here, under the sheltering branches, life had paused in a moment of fragile grace. Joseph and the team worked with quiet determination, every action measured by the cub's responses. The cub's slow transition from fear to tentative calm was a small victory, a sign that rescue was not just about intervention, but about honoring the rhythms of wildlife. The stakes remained. Without food, care, and rest, the cub could not survive. But with each passing hour of gentle attention, hope grew. Night settled over the Mara with a soft coolness. The cub shifted once more, eyes blinking slowly as it nestled deeper into the blankets. Joseph sat close, careful to keep his presence unobtrusive but steady. The faint rustle of leaves and the distant calls of wild creatures marked the quiet closing of the day. The cub's breathing was steady now, and its eyes, once wide with fear, showed the first fragile glimmers of calm curiosity, a silent promise that this small life, so recently hidden and alone, was beginning to find refuge. Joseph whispered softly, "You're safe here." The words hung in the cool air, a quiet affirmation carried beneath the sheltering branches, where shadow and care met in gentle balance. The night settled deeply over the camp, the vast silence of the savanna broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The cub lay curled beneath the canopy of acacia trees, its small body tense despite the shelter and warmth of the blankets. Suddenly, a faint cry cut through the darkness, a plaintive, trembling sound that echoed the rawness of loss and longing. It was a fragile call, stretched thin by exhaustion and fear, a voice reaching out into the vast emptiness in search of something familiar. The team around the camp froze, each listening closely, their faces drawn with quiet concern. The cub's soft, persistent wails spoke of isolation, the ache of being separated from the pride that should have been nearby. Ranger Joseph sat quietly just beyond the cub's reach, his presence steady but unobtrusive. The sound was a stark reminder of what was at risk. The cub's vulnerability was absolute. Alone and injured, the tiny lion was exposed to threats both seen and unseen. The night brought cooler air, but with it came new dangers: hyenas, jackals, and other predators that prowled under cover of darkness. The team's urgency was muted by respect for the wild rhythms around them. They would not rush or overwhelm the cub, but they remained alert, ready to respond if danger drew near. Each cry that echoed into the night was a plea not just for the mother's return, but for survival itself. The cub's body trembled with the effort of the call, eyes bright and glossy reflecting the faint light of a small lantern placed nearby. It pressed itself deeper into the blankets, the injury in its paw still raw and painful, but the cry persisted, persistent and desperate. This expression of loneliness was not a demand for human help, but a natural instinct, a survival mechanism reaching across the void. The team's veterinarian, Dr. Amina, whispered softly as she leaned closer, her voice a gentle counterpoint to the cub's cries. "It's okay, little one," she said, careful not to startle. Her touch was light, reassuring, and a bridge between worlds. The cub responded with a slow blink, a small moment of trust amid the fear. Around the camp, the night was alive with sounds. Insects hummed steadily. The distant roar of lions occasionally broke the silence, and the wind stirred the dry grass in soft waves. These were the familiar calls of the wild, reminders of a world where survival was both constant struggle and enduring hope. The cub's cries blended into this chorus, a singular note of vulnerability and resilience. Joseph understood that the mother or pride might hear the call, or perhaps they were already searching. In this wilderness, every sound could mean safety or danger, presence or absence. The team took turns keeping watch, their movements slow and deliberate, careful not to disrupt the fragile calm. They adjusted blankets, offered small sips of water, and remained close enough to comfort, but far enough to avoid overwhelming the cub. The risk was ever present. If the cub panicked, it might try to flee, worsening its injury or falling prey to predators. If the cries went unanswered, exhaustion could claim the little lion before dawn. Each choice was weighted with quiet urgency. As hours passed, the cries lessened to soft whimpers, the cub's energy waning but its spirit enduring. Joseph stayed near, his voice a low murmur in the dark. "You're not alone," he whispered, a promise made softly to the night. The cub's eyes met his for a brief moment, the connection a fragile thread in the vast wilderness. In that gaze was the unspoken understanding of shared vulnerability and hope. The night stretched on, the camp holding its breath between moments of sound and silence. The cub's cries had echoed loss and longing, but now they spoke also of endurance, a small life holding on against the darkness. The team's steady presence was a quiet vow. This little lion was seen, cared for, and not forgotten. The wild waited beyond the trees, vast and uncertain, but within the circle of soft light and gentle voices, there was refuge. As the first pale light of dawn began to edge across the horizon, the cub's cries faded into soft sighs. The team remained close, ready for the new day's challenges, their hope carried in the quiet breaths of the sleeping animal. The night had been long, marked by loss but softened by care. The fragile balance between fear and trust had shifted slightly toward survival. Joseph looked toward the waking sky and whispered once more, "You're almost there." The words floated gently into the early morning air, a quiet promise that this long night was but one chapter in a story still unfolding. The first light of dawn cast a pale glow across the camp, softening the edges of the acacia trees and bathing the resting cub in gentle warmth. The quiet stillness of early morning held a fragile peace, broken only by the subtle stirring of grasses and distant wildlife beginning their day. Suddenly, the team's careful watch caught movement at the edge of the clearing, a lone figure slipping silently through the shadows. A lioness, cautious and deliberate, approached the camp. Her steps were measured and slow, as if weighing each moment with care. The shape was unmistakable, but the tension in her body spoke of uncertainty, of a wary hope that something remained familiar in this small human enclave within the wild. The cub stirred immediately, its eyes wide and unblinking, locking onto the figure with a mixture of hesitation and longing. The soft whimpers that had filled the long night now shifted in tone, a delicate balance between hope and fear. The lioness paused at the boundary of the camp, nostrils flaring as she took in the scents carried on the morning breeze, the unfamiliar presence of humans and the faint but unmistakable scent of her offspring. Joseph and the team held their breath, the weight of the moment pressing quietly around them. The stakes were immense. A reunion could mean the restoration of the cub's world, but any sudden move could shatter fragile trust and send the cub fleeing into danger once more. The lioness's eyes were alert and searching. Her ears flicked attentively, catching sounds beyond human hearing, the subtle cues of her cub's presence and condition. Her body tensed and relaxed in gentle waves, each movement a negotiation between instinct and hope. The cub responded with soft, hesitant calls, small sounds of recognition carried on the breeze. It shifted its weight, tentative but drawn toward the approaching figure. The air between them seemed charged with a quiet, raw energy, a conversation without words, carried in glances, sounds, and the slow unfolding of trust. Joseph's voice was low, steady, and barely above a whisper. "It's okay. She's here." The words were more a reminder to the team and the cub than an attempt to calm. The lioness moved a few steps closer, the distance narrowing in careful increments. Her muscles rippled beneath tawny fur as she approached, eyes never leaving the cub. There was no rush, no force, only the patient, measured steps of a mother drawn by the faint but unyielding bond to her young. The cub's eyes followed every movement, ears swiveling with alertness. Fear was still present, a natural wariness of the unfamiliar, but hope wove through the tension, softening it. The environment around the camp was waking slowly. Birds called from nearby branches and the grass swayed in a gentle morning breeze. The cub shifted again, this time inching slightly toward the lioness, testing the air between them. The injury to its paw made movement cautious, but the instinct to reunite was strong. The lioness lowered her head in a subtle invitation, a gesture familiar and deeply rooted in their shared wildness. The cub responded with a soft nuzzle, the fragile beginning of reconnection. The team watched in silence, aware that this moment was both rare and delicate. The risk was clear. If the cub fled, the injury could worsen, and the protective presence of humans might be lost. If the lioness hesitated or felt threatened, she might retreat, leaving the cub isolated once more. But if the reunion continued gently, there was a chance for healing beyond physical wounds, restoration of family, strength, and survival. Joseph and the team maintained a careful distance, their movements slow and deliberate, ensuring that neither lion was overwhelmed or frightened. Their role was one of quiet support, witnessing and facilitating a natural process without interference. The lioness and cub moved closer, a silent rhythm guiding their reunion. The cub pressed its small face into the lioness's neck, a gesture of seeking comfort and safety. The lioness responded with a soft rumble, her body relaxing in response to the presence of her young. This was no dramatic moment but a gentle, profound exchange of recognition and relief. The wild world beyond the camp waited, but here, under the early light, two lives reconnected. The fragile bond that had weathered injury, fear, and separation now began to strengthen again. Joseph glanced toward the horizon as the sun rose higher, its warm light spilling over the grasses and trees. The lioness stood protectively over the cub, her eyes alert but calm. The camp remained quiet, the team respecting the space shared by mother and offspring. The stakes remained. Survival depended on this reunion, on the mother's ability to care for the cub, and on the cub's readiness to rejoin the pride. For now, the moment was one of hope and quiet resilience. "You're safe now," Joseph whispered softly, the words carrying a gentle promise as the mother and cub settled together beneath the awakening sky. The soft sound of their breathing blended with the rustling grass, a quiet testament to the enduring power of connection in the wild. The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the leaves and casting gentle patterns across the clearing where the cub and lioness lay close together. Their bodies pressed side by side in a quiet, steady rhythm, the subtle rise and fall of breathing marking a fragile peace. The cub, once trembling with fear and pain, now nestled more deeply against the mother's warm flank. This was not a sudden transformation but a slow rekindling of trust, shaped by shared instinct and the careful patience of the rescue team. The mother's movements were soft and deliberate, a gentle nudge here, a low rumble there, each gesture a silent reassurance that the cub was safe to return to lean on the familiar strength of family. Joseph stood quietly at the edge of the camp, eyes watching without intrusion. The team had learned the delicate balance of their role, not as saviors who controlled the wild, but as guardians who supported life at its own pace. The cub and mother were wild creatures, their instincts intact, their connection deep and raw. Every careful step toward reunion was a testament to nature's resilience and the team's respect for the boundaries between human help and wild freedom. The stakes remained clear. Without this reconnection, the cub faced ongoing risk from injury, starvation, and isolation. But with the mother's return, the fragile threads of survival wove stronger. The cub's eyes opened more fully now, curiosity flickering alongside lingering caution. Its small paws tested the ground, stepping lightly near the mother's side before settling again. The injury was still tender, slowing movement, but the presence of the mother seemed to ease the pain, replacing loneliness with quiet comfort. The lioness shifted, her body language relaxed yet alert, muscles rippling beneath tawny fur as she settled protectively over the cub. The soft brush of her tail against the earth was a subtle promise of care and defense. Their shared breathing and gentle touches spoke volumes more than words ever could, a language of survival, reassurance, and renewal. The environment around them was alive with the slow unfolding of the day. Birds called softly from the branches above, insects moved quietly through the grass, and the distant sounds of the savannah, distant hooves, rustling leaves, reminded all that life here was constant movement and change. The camp, once a place of urgent intervention, had softened into a sanctuary of patience and respect. Joseph and the team knew their presence must recede to allow nature's rhythms to reclaim this small but vital space. Joseph's voice broke the silence briefly, gentle and calm. "You're safe now." The words were a simple acknowledgement of what had been won through quiet persistence, not force. The cub shifted again, its small head rising to meet the mother's gaze. The lioness responded with a low, steady rumble, a sound both grounding and tender. In these exchanges, trust was being rebuilt, not just between mother and cub, but between wildlife and the humans who had intervened. The team understood that true rescue was measured not by control, but by relinquishing it when the moment came. The mother's eyes scanned the clearing, alert for any sign of danger, her body poised between rest and readiness. The cub followed her lead, tentative but increasingly assured. This was the slow work of healing, a return to instincts dulled by injury and fear, rekindled by presence and protection. The team observed without interference, aware that their role now was to step back and watch the natural bonds take hold again. The stakes could not be overstated. Without the mother's care, the cub's chances remained slim. With her, there was hope. As the sun climbed higher, the shadows shifted and lengthened across the grass. The mother and cub moved together slowly. the cub leaning often into the lioness's steady frame, testing its strength and balance. The camp was quiet, the urgency of earlier hours fading into a measured stillness. Joseph and the team gathered their things, their movements deliberate and unobtrusive, mindful of the fragile peace. They had witnessed a moment of profound reconnection, one that would ripple through the cub's chances of survival. The breeze stirred the tall grasses nearby, carrying with it the subtle scent of earth and life that marked the savanna. In this gentle wind, the cub and mother shared space again, a space reclaimed from fear and isolation, renewed by trust. The wild was waiting beyond the clearing, vast and unforgiving. But here, in this soft morning light, the team saw a beginning. Joseph spoke once more, his voice low and steady. "You belong here." The words hung quietly, a respectful farewell and a promise to protect from a distance. The cub nestled closer, eyes closing softly in trust, while the mother's steady presence offered silent assurance. The long journey from fear to calm was not yet complete, but the path had been found. The afternoon sun cast a warm, golden light across the open plains as the cub, now steadier on its feet, began to move deliberately alongside the pride. Each step was cautious but sure, a slow reclaiming of the natural rhythm long disrupted by injury and separation. The small lion's gaze flickered between the mother's steady presence and the wide expanse of the savanna ahead. The team observed quietly from a respectful distance, aware that this fragile moment marked a turning point, the final steps toward true freedom. The cub's body bore the marks of recovery, the paw still tender, movements measured, but the spirit growing steadily stronger with every breath. Joseph stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the family moving with the subtle grace of wildlife returning home. The lioness led gently, her posture protective yet unhurried, guiding the cub with a patience born of instinct. Around them, the pride adjusted their pace, a living mosaic of tawny coats and cautious eyes. The cub's small head turned occasionally toward the team, eyes wide but not frightened, a quiet acknowledgement of the help that had made this reunion possible. The stakes had been clear from the start. Without the mother's care and the team's intervention, the cub would not have survived. Now, as they stepped deeper into the wilderness, survival rested in the strength of family and the vastness of the wild. The savanna stretched endlessly, a patchwork of golden grasses, thorny bushes, and distant acacia trees. The air was warm and dry, filled with the faint scent of earth and life that defined this harsh yet beautiful land. As the pride moved forward, the cub's steps grew steadier, testing balance and strength against the soft ground. Its movements were deliberate and careful, the mark of a young life learning again to trust its own body. The lioness slowed now and then, allowing the cub time to catch up, her low rumble a steady reassurance in the shifting silence. The team watched the delicate dance of reunion and independence with quiet reverence. Joseph's voice broke softly through the stillness. "You're almost home now." His words were a gentle recognition of the journey from vulnerability to strength, from captivity back to the wild. The cub's ears flicked at the sound, but it did not stop. The instinct to follow, to survive, was stronger. The lioness glanced back briefly, eyes meeting Joseph's with a mix of gratitude and resolve. The connection between humans and wild animals was silent but profound, bound by respect and the shared goal of survival. As the pride moved into the open grasslands, the team began to withdraw slowly, their presence receding to leave space for nature's own rhythms. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with it the soft sounds of distant hooves and bird calls. The cub took one last tentative step toward the unknown, pausing to look back briefly before turning fully to follow the family into the wild. The moment was bittersweet, the relief of reunion mixed with the quiet sadness of farewell. The team had been witnesses and helpers, but the wild was where these lives belonged. The sun dipped lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The Pride's silhouettes merged with the colors of the fading day, moving steadily into the embrace of the savannah. The cub's small figure, once fragile and trembling, now carried a new confidence born from care, resilience, and connection. The risks of the past weeks, the injury, the isolation, the uncertainty, had not vanished entirely, but they had been met with courage and hope. Joseph took a final breath, watching the family disappear into the golden haze. "Go well," he whispered softly, the words carrying a quiet blessing on the wind. The team gathered their belongings, their movements slow and deliberate, each step a gesture of respect for the wild lives they had touched. The savannah around them was vast and indifferent, yet in this moment, it held a quiet promise of survival and renewal. A gentle breeze stirred the grass, the soft rustling a lullaby to the returning Pride. The sun's last light flickered through the leaves, painting the landscape with warmth and calm. In the distance, a lone bird called softly, a reminder that life here was constant, enduring, shifting, and always moving forward. The cub's journey was far from over, but the hardest steps had been taken. Now, beneath the wide African sky, the family was together again, walking slowly into the freedom that belonged to them. The tall grass swayed gently in the evening breeze, the golden light of the setting sun casting long, soft shadows across the vast expanse of the savannah. The Pride moved steadily forward, the mother's protective posture guiding the cub through the shifting landscape. Their figures grew smaller against the horizon, blending into the tapestry of earth and sky, until they disappeared entirely into the tall grasses and scattered acacias. The quiet rustle of their movement was the only sign they had ever been there, a fleeting, fragile presence in a wild world that remained indifferent and vast. Joseph and the team stood silently, watching the last traces of the Pride vanish into the wilderness. There was no cheering, no hurried celebration, only a deep, quiet acknowledgement of what had unfolded. The fragile line between human intervention and wildlife had been walked with care and humility, a balance maintained through respect for nature's rhythms. The cub's survival, once uncertain and fragile, now carried a hopeful momentum, yet the team understood that the journey ahead belonged to the lions alone. Their role was finished, but the story would live on, a whisper carried in the wind and the tall grasses. The environment around them seemed to exhale with the close of day. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and distant bird calls faded into the hush of twilight. The savannah held its ancient pulse, unseen, unhurried, and vast. The connection the team had forged with these wild lives was a quiet miracle, a testament to patience and gentle presence. This moment was not about dominance or control, but about coexistence and respect. The lions had reclaimed their place and the humans had stepped back, their work done, but their hearts full. The cub's journey was a fragile thread woven into the broader fabric of the wild. Its small steps toward recovery and reunion had been shaped by instinct, care, and cautious trust. Now, as the Pride disappeared, the team carried the weight of the experience silently, aware that wildlife would always follow its own course, sometimes unpredictable, sometimes harsh, but always alive. The stakes had been high. Without intervention, the cub's fate might have been sealed. With it, there was hope. And with hope came responsibility, not to own these lives, but to protect and honor them from afar. Joseph's voice broke softly through the quiet. "We did what we could." The words were simple but held the depth of countless hours spent watching, waiting, and caring. The team gathered their gear, each movement slow and deliberate, mirroring the respect they felt for the wild world around them. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, a final blessing on the day's journey. The distant calls of other animals carried on the wind, reminders that life continued beyond this small story, unfolding endlessly in cycles of challenge and survival. The grass whispered against itself, stirred by the breeze that seemed to carry the cub's story across the plains. The pride's echoes lingered, not in sound, but in the subtle marks left on the earth, in the shifting patterns of shadow and light, and in the memory of a quiet reunion between mother and young. The wild held no promises, no guarantees, only the endless dance of life moving forward. The team felt the weight of this truth, a solemn gratitude settling over them like the soft twilight. As the last light faded, the savanna stretched wide and open, a place of both danger and hope. The cubs' small footprints would soon be joined by many others, steps taken in the ongoing struggle to live and thrive. Joseph and the team turned slowly away, carrying the story with them, not as owners or masters, but as witnesses and guardians. The quiet bonds forged here would remain, an unspoken promise to protect and respect the wild. The evening deepened, and the wind moved gently through the grass, a soft sigh beneath the vast African sky. The distant movement of a herd, the faint call of a night bird, life carried on, relentless and beautiful. The cub's journey had reached a new chapter, written in footsteps fading into the wild.